Hi, and welcome to another edition of Jules Voto's Photo Focus. Today we're going to be looking at the Yashica TL-Electro. This is a very simple 35mm single lens reflex camera. It dates from 1972 and it has a through the lens meter. Doesn't work on this model that I have. It's a lot of these old cameras, the meters don't work, but you really don't need the meter. You could always use a handheld meter or the Sunny 16 rule and find correct exposure that way. So let's get started, and as usual, I'm going to start on the top right of the camera as you were holding it, and it has your standard position of the shutter speed dial, and it goes from B, and on B, when you press the shutter release, the shutter opens. When you let go of the shutter release, the shutter closes. That is used for time exposures. When the camera's on a tripod, obviously you can't hand hold it at those long speeds. And you would use a cable release, a locking cable release, preferably when you're using the setting of B. Okay, it has shutter speeds from 1, okay, all the way up to 1/1000th of a second. Now, one thing kind of unique for a camera like this, an inexpensive, relatively inexpensive camera, is that the speeds from a 60th up to 1/1000 you could set in between. Most cameras, most mechanical cameras, and this is a fully mechanical camera, battery is only needed for the meter, if the meter worked, but otherwise the camera will work fine, everything will work without a battery. So that's pretty unique. The Nikon F2 works that way from an 80th of a second up to a 2000th. You could set intermediate speeds, but most cameras of that era do not. And so that's one little unique thing about this camera. Your X speed for electronic flash is 1/60th of a second. Typical for a camera like this with a horizontal cloth focal plane shutter. Okay, to the right and towards the front a little is your shutter release, threaded for a standard cable release. We have our film advance lever, one full stroke, winds the film, cocks the shutter, and advances the frame counter. You can actually use smaller strokes with this camera. A lot of cameras you can't. Okay, and this frame counter will reset once you open the back. Let's see, let's go to the front of the camera. Pretty simple here. We have a self timer. It's about 8-9 seconds. Once you move the lever all the way down, press your shutter release, and the shutter will fire. Unlike some self timers, when it starts, the lens does not stop down, the mirror does not flip up until the actual exposure is made. Some cameras, the self-timer, once it's activated, it will stop the lens down and flip up the mirror. You know what? This is something I'm not sure of. Can you cancel the self-timer? Let's see. So let's wind it all the way down, and I don't think we could cancel it. No. We could push the lever back, but we can't cancel it. Okay, so we're just going to let it run through. You will notice the lens, at the moment of exposure, the lens stops down. This lens, the aperture is a little sticky. I don't know if you could see that. As it reopens, it's kind of slow. It's not the camera. I tried a Pentax lens on this camera, and the Pentax lens worked perfectly. All right, why don't we go over to the lens mount, and this is an M42 screw thread lens mount. Okay, there are a zillion lenses, not literally, but there are a lot of lenses available for this camera with this M42 screw thread. Of course, the most famous are the Pentax Takumars, which are excellent lenses. All right, so let's put this lens back on. I just realized I forgot to show you something on top. I shouldn't forget that, but there's one more thing with your shutter speed dial. Here, let's just rotate it around. you have your ASA setting, your film speed setting. Today we refer to that as ISO, and it just lift up the ring around the shutter speed dial and you can change it. It's a little tough to turn because what's happening is it's turning the shutter speed dial. But the meter don't work, so I'm not really too concerned with that. All right, so let's come back to the top before we go to the left side of the camera. We have a standard hot shoe. On this side, we have our film plane indication. That's used for macro photography if you're going to do manual calculations on how much you have to increase exposure for extension tubes. We have our rewind knob and crank. All right, by pulling up on the rewind knob, that opens the back. But before we do that, we just want to come see two more things. On the front of the camera here, we have our meter switch, which also stops the lens down. This camera uses stop-down metering. And if you can see that, the lens is now stopped down to the working aperture, which looks like it's set to f8. Okay, and then push it back up, and the lens opens up. There's no, that's really the meter switch. So when you turn the meter on, it stops the lens down because you have to use stop-down metering. When you would take the picture, here, let's put that on. Okay, you see the lens stop down. Once you take the picture, the lens opens up again to the working, to the full aperture. Right, we have one more thing here. We have a connection for flash. Okay, you could plug in a cord for flash. All right, we're going to open the back, and the back's a little tough to open. The reason I bought this camera, so when you pull up on the rewind knob, the back should pop open. You need to just pull it open a little bit. Again, this particular camera. I'm sure others are in better shape. I bought this camera for about $45, but I didn't buy it for the camera. It came with two Pentax lenses, a 28 3.5 and a 135 3.5. So it was a really good deal. I really didn't care much about the body, but it's a decent camera. It's decently well made. So we're going to load film. All right, but before we do, let me just do something. Seem to be forgetting things today. All right, so now you're going to load a roll of film, right? You always want to make sure before you load a fresh roll that there's no film in the camera, because if you open the back while all the film is on this side, you're going to ruin the film. So we unfold the rewind crank and just turn it in the direction of the arrow slowly. And there's absolutely no resistance. That means there's no film in the camera. Okay, so now we're going to open up the back by pulling up on the rewind knob and pulling it open. Okay. Now let me just explain a little bit about the inside of the camera. Here's our cloth focal plane, horizontally traveling shutter. Okay. We have here our sprocket drive with the sprocket teeth, and we have a multi-slotted take-up spool. All right, so we're going to take our film, we're going to drop it into this side, we're going to push down on the rewind knob. Then we pull out some of the leader, and we just rotate this around so we find a good slot in the take-up spool. And we're just going to shove it in there. This is a little hard to do in the position I'm in. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to advance the film a little bit, right? Advance the lever. We want to make sure the sprocket holes engage in the sprocket teeth on the sprocket drive inside the camera. That's important. Okay, we want to rewind slightly on the, turn the rewind crank slightly to make sure there's no slack in the film. But one other thing I should mention, for an inexpensive camera, this has this additional roller. A lot of cameras don't. The higher end ones usually do, and that's to help keep the film flat. All right, so now we close the back, turn the camera back up. Now, we're going to need to make two blanks, okay, to get rid of that film that was exposed when we loaded it. All right. I want you to notice the rewind knob. All right, see now if I try to turn it, there's a resistance. Watch it as I advance the film. You see how it's turning? That means the film is coming out of the cassette into the take-up spool. If this rewind knob was not turning, that would mean that the film was not loaded properly. Open the back and do it again. So now we're just going to fold down the rewind crank. I leave that rewind crank open. It's a little easier to tell that the rewind knob is turning. Okay, so now we're going to be ready for frame number 1. Okay, there's a standoff position for your advance lever. Now let's just go back to the back of the camera again real quick. And this is the battery compartment. It unscrews. The camera would take 2 PX640 1.35 volt Mallory batteries or equivalent. You're not going to find Mercury batteries today. You may be able to find a substitute battery. The meter, the viewfinder, I should say, very simple. You have a standard focusing screen, non-interchangeable. It has a central micro prism spot for focusing. On the right side of the viewfinder is something that was not too common back when this camera came out. It has LEDs on the right side of the viewing screen to indicate exposure. Now, I don't have a picture of the way it looks, so I made this great drawing. I am not an artist, okay? So let me just explain. I believe the lights are green, okay? And what you would have on the right side of the viewfinder, if you're overexposing, you will just have half of, it looks like half of a racetrack, right? If you're underexposing, it would face in this direction. If exposure was correct, these two pieces would join, and it would look like that for correct exposure. Okay, again, I apologize for my drawing, but I think it makes the point. Okay, on the bottom of the camera, we have our standard tripod socket and our rewind button. So let me just fire off a few more frames here. Okay. All right, let's say we came to the end of the roll. We had a 36 exposure roll. Our frame counter would indicate 36. Sometimes it goes beyond 36. When you get to the end of the roll and you try to advance film, the advance lever may not go all the way. It may not move all the way because the film is done. The film is all out of the cassette. Don't force it. Okay, just make a note of your frame counter. If it says 36 or 37, then you could be rest assured that the roll is done. What you do then, you're going to come and press in the rewind button, make sure it stays in. Then you're going to come up top here, unfold the rewind crank and turn it in the direction of the arrow, and you will feel some resistance. Now, I don't want to, normally you would just rewind it all the way until you felt no resistance. I want to keep that leader out. Okay, so I just turned it until I heard the film pull off the take-up spool. Now I'm going to open the back and pull up on the rewind knob a little bit to let the film out, and you send it off for processing. Okay, so I guess that's it with this camera. I don't know if I mentioned the ISO on this camera goes from 12 to 1600, but again, the meter don't work on this particular model. What else do I need to tell you about this? Like I said, there's a lot of lenses available for this camera. If you could find one really cheap, I've seen these bodies for $10, $15, $20, sometimes even with a lens. You know, it's a good deal. If you're shooting digital and you haven't shot film and you want to try out a film camera, again, you can get these so cheap, why not, right? Or if you just have another screw thread body, a Pentax, let's say a Pentax Spotmatic, and you just want a backup camera or a camera to take with you, you know, you have a 50 millimeter lens on one and a wide angle or telephoto on the other, you know, this would be a good camera for that. So that is it for the Yashica TL-Electro. There's also a TL-Electro X that actually came out before this camera in '68, and there were other models after this. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you have any questions on the Yashica or anything photography related, please leave your question in the comments below, or you could email me your question. So again, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you next time.